Hello again. Last time we talked about variables. We broke variables down into the different types of variables that we had. So we were looking at, first of all, the individual, and then with each individual we had a number of variables, and those variables were broken down into, once again, category or quantity. So categorical or quantitative. Today we're specifically going to be taking a look at categorical variables and graphing those. In order to understand a graph, we need to understand one word, and that is the distribution. You can think of distribution whenever you went to school as a or whenever you're dealing a deck of cards. You've got your dealer, he's sitting here, and then here's person 1, person 2, person 3, person 4, and he has to distribute these cards to each person. We are going to be taking a look at how are the individuals distributed into categories. So we're going to be looking at measuring that data. And when we do that, we represent it quite often with pie charts and bar graphs. So let's take a look at one of those. So if we were to take a look at this chart or this table of information, it's probably a little bit misleading because initially we would think here's the individuals, but honestly, with the information that was gathered here, these are the categories. So before we got to this point, we asked a whole bunch of individuals. So we went out and we said, hey, Bob and Sue and John, Bob, Sue, John, Matt, etc. They're at a college. What's your field of study? And some of them said, oh, I'm in the arts, and I'm in biology, and I'm in math. So that was how the individuals collected that data. But we took all of that data and we said, for example, let's say 106 of these students decided that they were going to be in the arts and humanities, and we had 1,000 students total, and so we ended up with 10.6% of those students. We divided that, 0.106, and then moved the decimal place, all that stuff. That's where this number came from. So remember, these are the categories, and this is the distribution, how many of those individuals were dealt into each category. So we're talking about the distribution. Notice in this case we're working with percents, and that if you add up all these percents, it doesn't actually equal 100.1. That is because of rounding error. We rounded some of those things back when we did this. So maybe it wasn't actually 106. Maybe we're talking about a bigger group of students, like it was 1,062 students out of 10,000. But instead of using 10.62%, we rounded everything to 10.6%. And in that rounding, this isn't always going to be exactly 100. So that's what we have. Now, when we go to graph that information, we are going to use, because this is a category and here's our distribution, we're going to use one of two different types. We're going to use the pie chart. So here's type 1 and here's type 2, the bar graph. Both of these do a fine job of illustrating how many of the students were in each one. A lot of people like pie charts, especially when we're talking about 100%, because the pie is the entire thing. That's all the students. Bar graphs, on the other hand, you'll notice in this one, this bar graph, I can tell right away, is not measuring the percent of people that are using an Apple iPhone or an Android smartphone. Because if you look, here it looks like there's about 51 people here, and 50 people here, and 43 people there. This is an actual measure of the raw data. So you can use percentages in this. But like I said, a lot of people tend to do percents as a pie chart and then use the actual raw data in a bar graph. So that's some of the things that you need to remember when you're doing and when you're working with this. One of the things that you'll also notice is that both of these are really good ways of doing categorical data. In our next video, we're going to take a look at a histogram, and we're going to specifically compare a histogram to a bar graph and try to understand the differences between those two.